Photography is not a representational art, at least according to Roger Scruton. Now, the things Roger Scruton says in his work are typically controversial and wrong, but it's very interesting to consider in what way exactly they are wrong. When Scruton argues that photographic representation is not really a form of art, he is actually interested in saying that it is not really a form of representation at all, or at least not a form of representation as that term is applied to other kinds of pictures, paintings and drawings. So why would he say that? Think about photographic pictures. They clearly bear the same kind of visual resemblances to things that painted or drawn images do. In fact, many photographic pictures resemble the objects they represent even more closely. So that really can't be the difference. And also, if we think that there is a distinctive kind of picture seeing that we have when we look at paintings or drawings, it seems that we have that experience just as much when we look at photographic pictures. When you look at a photograph, it's very ordinary to say that you see the picture's subject, what was photographed, in the surface of the picture. So what exactly allows someone to suggest even that photographic images are not truly pictorial representations? They don't really make for a representational art. The core of this claim is really the absence of a role for human beings in the photographic process. And it's good to understand exactly how that argument works. Because, of course, photographs as they are made by human people. So we can't really say that humans are not involved in taking pictures, because that would be false. So the idea here is a little bit more sophisticated and precise. Think of it this way. What actually is a photograph? And here you may think of it as simply the recording of some kind of light image that falls through a lens on a sensitive surface. In old-fashioned photography, this was something like a piece of paper with a chemical coating that was light sensitive. Nowadays, you will find digital sensors that, through some kind of light sensitivity, encode an image and transmit it to a memory card. That process, it seems, lies at the heart of photographic images. And the way I just presented it doesn't really rely on any kind of human intention or plan or attempts at communicating. Images are just registered, a bit like as if they were just traces left on surfaces. You could even think of a very, very primitive form of photography where, I don't know, in a prehistoric time, there is, by a sheer accident, some kind of lens that got stuck in a mountain, some piece of glass that was formed in a volcanic eruption. And that lens now refracts light in such a way as to cast an image on an opposing wall. And it does that for, I don't know, tens or hundreds of years. That same image, say it's the image of a mountain range in the background. You could think that eventually that image will get somehow burned into that wall. And here we've got a photograph, a completely prehistoric natural photograph. There was no human being that came to produce it. There was no human being involved in intending this image to come about. It just happened. It was an accident of history. And yet this would count as a photographic image because that is how photography works. Maybe slightly closer to home, think about Polaroid cameras. So if you've got a Polaroid camera, the idea is that instantaneously a picture comes out and it develops all by its own after pressing the shutter button. So you don't really have to do anything else between pressing the shutter and being in possession of the photographic image. Now imagine that someone drops a Polaroid camera and accidentally the shutter goes off. There is no intention involved, and yet a picture is made, a picture is taken. So it is by drawing our attention to the differences between manual production of paintings, manual productions of drawings, and the sheer automaticity of the photographic medium that Scruton is able to drive this wedge in the images that we find. So suddenly we're inclined to admit that yes, it is true that meaning and significance are somehow part and parcel of the painterly arts and the arts of drawing. You can't really have a pictorial representation that is painted without any meaning or significance. That communicative project is built into it. Otherwise, what we'd have is just things that resemble paintings or resemble drawings but aren't actually drawings because they are sheer flukes or accidents that happened in history. Imagine someone spilling a can of paint on the floor and a seeming image forms. We wouldn't count that as a pictorial representation. That would be a sheer accident. On the other hand, the accident is perfectly admissible in the practice of photography, even though it's not standard. So when Scruton talks about this ideal photograph, he just is interested in what is essential to the photograph, what is part of each and every photograph and what isn't. And what he observes is that the accidental photograph is just as much a photograph as any other photograph. And that is core, because if that's possible, if photography can come about by sheer accident, then it seems that we're not dealing here with a kind of human representation. We're not dealing here with a kind of meaning or significance, but merely with a trace or an effect. And an effect is not a kind of representation. And an effect cannot be evaluated as a kind of art. So if, like me, you really want to resist the conclusion that photography is not an art form, what you need to do is identify where exactly Scruton's line of reasoning goes wrong. And that's easier said than done, because some of the things he observes about photography surely are true, and some of the inferences that he draws are surely compelling. So your task really is to see which of the premises you want to resist, such that his conclusion no longer follows.